Good morning. As the community is coming together to honor Johnny Hurley.
Today, people gathered in front of the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office demanding justice for Johnny Hurley.
Johnny Hurley.
Johnny Hurley.
John Hurley's Johnny Hurley.
Johnny Hurley.
John Hurley.
Johnny Hurley.
The big question is who shot and killed Johnny Hurley? Johnny Hurley.
It's one of many questions we still have for Arvada police. They're not telling us who killed Johnny Hurley.
Those who knew and loved Johnny Hurley are
Johnny Hurley.
He was the man who shot and killed a shooter in Olde Town Arvada before Arvada police shot and killed him.
The family of Good Samaritan Johnny Hurley has filed a federal lawsuit.
This comes exactly 1 year after Arvada police shot and killed him, mistaking him for the active shooter.
Yeah, Darius Johnson is in the newsroom. He's breaking down details of the lawsuit. Good morning, Darius.
Good morning, Gary, Corey, and Natasha. We just learned about this within the last 30 minutes. That lawsuit was filed today by John Hurley's mother, Kathleen Boland. The lawsuit says Hurley died needlessly because nearby Arvada police officers failed to confront the gunman, failed to verify Hurley was a threat, and an officer failed to announce himself before shooting Hurley from behind. All of this comes nearly 1 year to the day when a gunman targeted Arvada police and then shot and killed Officer Gordon Beasley with an AR-15. Johnny Hurley rushed in to kill the shooter with his own 9mm handgun. Hurley then picked up the gunman's AR-15 and started unloading it. So at this point, he was holding two guns. That's when police mistook him for the gunman and shot and killed him. The entire incident lasted for minutes, and the lawsuit alleges that officers stood by and watched the shooting unfold, comparing their lack of action to the school shooting in Uvalde just last month.
We should have been having a parade for what Johnny did instead of a memorial service.
Kathleen Boland isn't surprised that in 2021, when an active shooter killed Arvada police officer Gordon Beasley, then proceeded to fire at shops and restaurants in Olde Town, her son, who is in one of those shops, stepped out to save lives.
Johnny did what the police were supposed to do. He heard the call. He knew help was needed. He ran toward the danger, assessed the situation while he was on the run. And when he took out the shooter, following his training, he did what he was supposed to do, disarm the person who was down.
According to a lawsuit she filed against Arvada Police Chief Link Strait and the officer that killed Johnny, Craig Brownlow, that's when Brownlow, who had been taking cover from the gunman, shot Johnny in the back without warning, killing him. His mother says it devastated her entire family.
So considering that Johnny saved many lives, he should not have had to die for what he did.
In a statement, Arvada Police says the district attorney's office found Officer Brownlow's actions reasonable and justified under the circumstances, and an internal review found they're also considered consistent with APD policies and procedures. Boland disagrees and says Officer Brownlow should have reached out to Johnny before shooting him. She says if so, Johnny would be here today.
So considering that Johnny saved many lives, he should not have had to die for what he did.
They say Hurley rushed in to help, and by the time it was over, Officer Beasley, Hurley, and the gunman were all dead. We've learned a lot about Officer Beasley in the last few days, and now we're learning about the life of Johnny Hurley.
Friends say that they're not surprised that he ran towards the gunfire.
I was right over there when this man, whose name we don't speak of, he walked up to me, and he said something very inappropriate, and he made me feel very uncomfortable. Which later I found out he did with the intention of me calling the police so he could shoot them. And it makes me very upset that I had called, after that had happened, I walked around, I looked for somebody to help me, I called the police, and there were 3 officers in that building that did nothing. 15 minutes later, Gordon Beasley, who was my school resource officer, showed up. And this man shot him down. And I just remember just the whole vibe of everyone everywhere was just fear. Everybody ran. It was scary. Everybody hid, but one person didn't. Johnny Hurley, he was brave. He ran out from right over there, and he saved everybody. He saved me, and I'm very grateful for him. I think that the fact that his instinct was to run towards the danger says a lot about how great of a person he was. And even though I didn't know him, every year I will come here and I will feel for him, because I'm very grateful for him and what he did. And I'd like to hear some noise for what he did.
2 years after tragedy struck Olde Town Arvada, a community comes together to remember a hero.
Johnny put his life on the line for strangers, and then he had his life taken from him, sadly, by one of the police officers that were responding.
Friends and family gathered in the square to honor Johnny Hurley, as well as fallen officer Gordon Beasley. Johnny's mother and sister were wrapped up in hugs, tears, and fond memories from those who knew or wished they got to know their beloved Johnny.
It means a lot to me to see the community turning out. The pride that I have in how my son comported himself that day.
It's also difficult to be back where her son lost his life, as church bells rang at the exact time Johnny was killed.
Being, on the ground where it happened and walking to the wall where he stood and waited to do what needed to be done. That's moving to me.
Emotions were running high, but many are turning those feelings into action. So Johnny and his bravery are never forgotten.
We just want to live on the legacy of Johnny and doing the right thing.
We'll remember his name, Johnny Hurley, forever in our hearts he'll remain. In the face of danger, he stood strong and bold, guardian angel, a story to be told. Though he's no longer here, his spirit lives on. In the acts of kindness, his legacy's drawn. He touched so many lives with love and grace. In our hearts, his light will forever embrace. With eyes closed, we'll remember his name, Johnny Hurley. Forever in our hearts he'll remain.
The preliminary details about the Olde Town shooting and the people involved are a real warning about the simple, sometimes stereotypical assumptions we can make in these situations. As law enforcement's been scrutinized in recent years, there's been a suggestion that the people who are vocally critical of police are somehow a danger to police. Johnny Hurley, the Good Samaritan who rushed to help after Officer Gordon Beasley was shot in Arvada, Hurley was a vocal critic of law enforcement himself. His final social media post the morning before the shooting was a criticism of law enforcement. Yet Hurley leapt into action after the killing of an officer, and police say that he prevented more deaths that day, likely the deaths of other officers. And then Hurley was shot and killed by an officer who apparently mistook him for a threat. Everything we know about Johnny Hurley's beliefs, a mixture of anarchism and libertarianism, they defy the simple stereotype of the good guy with a gun being an ardent ally of law enforcement as well. Hurley's friends say that his beliefs were the driving force in his life. His actions on that day were simply heroic. Simplifying things beyond that does a disservice to him and to our understanding of what happened.
Johnny took up the mission to be a self-defender, if you want to call that, just honestly out of his desire to help and protect other people.
Douglas Evans says that he and friends for more than 15 years. Evans says he wasn't surprised when he learned about Hurley's heroic actions. The 40-year-old lost his life in the shooting Monday when police say that he tried to save the lives of others. Police aren't releasing any other details yet about Hurley, what he did, but in a Facebook post, the Army Navy surplus store says that Hurley, who was inside the store at the time of the shooting, heard the shots being fired, ran outside, and pulled out his concealed pistol and fired at the suspect. The store says it posted this because they wanted to let the family know and everybody else know about his heroic actions. They say he was brave, he was selfless, and heroic are just some of the words that they used to describe in the store. It says that he is a hero.
Johnny said to me multiple times that he would never let anybody be harmed in his presence, and that if he had to pay the price in order to protect other people, that he would be willing to do that.
To lay your life on the line, to put everything at stake, to help others, And in this case, it was strangers.
Her son, Johnny Hurley, was killed on June 21st last year in Olde Town Arvada. Hurley rushed in to kill the gunman who had just shot and killed Arvada police officer Gordon Beasley. When Hurley picked up the gunman's rifle, a lawsuit filed this week says that Arvada officer Craig Brownlow mistook Hurley for the gunman, shooting and killing him.
Johnny did a heroic thing, but he didn't have to die from doing it.
Until Arvada can at least acknowledge that it's wrong, that its officers violated the law, then we're never going to see any change.
The lawsuit alleges that Arvada officers did not respond to the gunman properly and instead stayed in their nearby administrative office. It also alleges that Officer Brownlow did not present himself as an officer to Hurley, while Hurley was allegedly unloading the gunman's rifle.
Johnny did what they were supposed to do. He didn't wonder who was shot or how they were shot.
The lawsuit also questions describing the suspect on that day, the shooter in a black shirt, Hurley in a red shirt.
We think this lawsuit will also show that that violation was caused by Arvada's deficient policies and training.
The DA, Alexis King, determined no criminal charges would be brought against Officer Brownlow. Officer Brownlow resigned from the department earlier this year in, quote, good standing. Bolin is hoping for a change in policy.
Instead of always living in the space of grief, I've been able to add other feelings, which is pride. I'm proud of what my son did.
So the city of Arvada said the lawsuit mischaracterized the incident and referred back to DA King's decision not to charge the officer, which then called the officer's actions justified. The city also said Officer Brownlow's actions were consistent with policy, and the police department is not considering changes to its training response or protocols right now. Kim and Tom.
So this is the first time we've heard from Johnny Hurley's mom.
Absolutely.
It was such a violent day. We all remember it well, but we also remember, this year now, these evolving emotions. And now, of course, it'll start to wind its way into the courts as well.
You guys ready? We'll go ahead and get started. My name's Alexis King. I'm the district attorney here in the 1st Judicial District. It's Jefferson and Gilpin counties. They're part of the team that worked to come to a decision in the Olde Town Arvada shooting from this summer. This has been an event that really impacted our community, and it's important for everyone to know that we will not be filing charges against the officer who shot the Good Samaritan John Hurley that day in June. On September 9th, Commander Kleinschmidt briefed me and my leadership team and turned the investigation over to us for review. One thing that became evident throughout our review was that John Hurley that day acted as a hero. Had he survived, we would have praised his bravery in engaging a mass shooter before anyone else was killed. He acted to defend others, and we will remember him for his selflessness. Our role was to look at the facts and compare them to the law. The officer here had objectively reasonable grounds to believe and did believe that he and other people were in imminent danger of being killed that day. The officers that day saw a mass shooter, heard many rounds of gunfire in broad daylight in the heart of Olde Town Arvada. Thus, the officer's decision to shoot John Hurley was legally justified despite his heroic actions that day. Let's talk about what happened that day. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, there were 3 officers assigned to the community outreach team that was substationed in a small office building that was just north of the square in Olde Town. They were finishing up lunch, and they heard a series of bangs. Bang, bang, bang. Pause. Bang, 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 bang. They left their office, they went down a narrow hallway to the east and looked out a small metal door with a glass window on top. In the southeast corner of that parking lot, they saw a man in black pacing around, and they saw him turn and head back east towards Webster Street behind the library and down by a parking lot. They saw him near a truck, but he didn't get into it. Instead, The man with an AR-style rifle, dressed all in black, turned back towards the Olde Town Arvada Square. All the officers, all three of them, knew at that point that they needed to find a way to engage this masked gunman. One of them went to the west side of the building and saw that there were just folks streaming out of the square in a panic, away from this man in black. Second officer went to a window on the south-facing side of the building, planning to engage the shooter through the window, but he never appeared. The first officer on the west side couldn't get out the door, and then the final officer stayed at that east-facing door. And then another round of gunfire. Bang, 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 bang. The officers ran to that east door. And as they came around the corner, they knew that their third officer at that east door had shot a man in a red shirt, standing near the same place that they had seen the man in black. The man in the red shirt was carrying an AR-style rifle, and it was on the ground beside him. We've dedicated hundreds of hours to evaluate the incredible decision made by the officer to engage John Hurley. And we hope our decision not to file charges will bring a small piece of closure to those affected, and that in this finality there is some healing.